This content is brought to you by Uphold, which makes crypto investing easy. I've been a user of Uphold since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. You can buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrencies on Uphold. You can also trade precious metals and equities. They have 10 plus million users, 250 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. As with all exchanges, you can buy and sell on them, but I highly recommend you custody your own crypto, not your keys, not your coins. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Giancarlo, who is a former CFTC Chairman and the author of the book, Crypto Dad, The Fight for the Future of Money. Chris, you're no stranger to the show. Welcome back.
It's great to be back with you, Tony.
So, Chris, we've been talking, I think it's over a year now, about the digital dollar and CBDCs around the world. And you're obviously part of the digital dollar project. What's the latest, any new developments that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think we as Americans tend to see the world really from our shores. If we could get, higher into the higher altitude and look at the globe as a whole, CBDC is advancing very, very rapidly around the globe. Mm-hmm. By the last count, over 120 countries are looking at CBDC, with 60 of them in advanced stages of exploration. Europe has said they will start beginning to deploy a CBDC in the next several years. The Brits have said they will have a digital pound by the end of the decade. 19 of the G20 countries are in advanced stages of exploration. And China has already placed central bank its digital yuan, what they call the ECNY, in over 240 million digital wallets. And that's a 2-year-old figure. The real number might be much higher than that. So however we slice it here in the United States, however we consider it, the fact of the matter is CBDC is on the march around the world. And whether American citizens want to or not, they're going to be dealing with CBDC, and American multinationals are going to be dealing with CBDC in their everyday activities by the end of this decade. Again, whether we wish to or not, whatever our feelings may be about CBDC or not, this is coming. Before we even talk about what the Fed's up to, this is coming on a global basis.
Yeah, to your point, it seems inevitable. And given the blockchain economy that we're headed to, the fiat currencies, assets, whatever it may be, will be on the blockchain. And to your point that even if people don't like it, in some way, they'll be using it if they're sending money cross-border or whatever it may be.
Right. Now, there's a lot of reasons to be very concerned about this. And certainly I've been concerned about this and wrote about this in the last chapter of my book, Crypto Dad, about the strong potential for an amazing invasion of one's economic privacy and the ability to control economic choices. So, and we'll come to that in just a minute. I don't want anybody to take away from this that I don't have the same concerns about that, if not more than the average person on the street. But at the same time, there's extraordinary opportunity in digital currency, whether that's sovereign operated by a state or non-sovereign operated by the private sector. And China sees that. What is that? Well, the fact of the matter is our existing traditional financial system is incredibly siloed. And in each of that silos are unique monopolies that control access and control arrangements. And as a result, our entire economic system is very balkanized, very expensive to operate, and has barriers to transacting from one sector to another. What do I mean by that? Well, if you want to do a private equity transaction here in the United States, you're in one body of law, the Reg D area of our securities laws, and there are unique private placements in that area, unique legal aspects and regulatory aspects of that area. If you want to then go over to the private securities, that involves different participants in that marketplace, different rules, different requirements. Now, if you want to go over to, say, my former area at the CFTC, hedging benchmark risk and commodity risk and interest rate risk, you're an entirely different legal landscape of the CFTC and its rules and the monopolies and the intermediaries that operate in that area. Now, if you want to go into the banking sector and do a commercial loan transaction, you're in a completely different area. And that may be federal law, it may be state law. And if you want to do money transmission, again, another but. So our financial system today is incredibly balkanized, and there is really no common denominator. What China envisions for their digital yuan is a digital operating system for a fully networked digital economy, taking out all of that latency, all of that siloed effect, using the digital currency as like a Microsoft OS operating system to engage in seamless financial transactions across the economy. That's a very powerful idea that in so much of our debate around digital currency, we're missing here. And we're missing it because we're not overly, because we are rightfully, but almost exclusively focused on the aspects of it that are about control, about surveillance and control. Now, that's a right focus. It's right to be focused on that. We at the Digital Dollar Project have been focused on that for years now. We put out a set of privacy principles over a year and a half ago. But we also need to be open to the upside. The fact of the matter is, Tony, and I said this at Consensus last week in Austin, Texas, digital currency is coming, both stablecoin, private operated digital currency, and publicly operated digital currency.
Yep.
That's not the question. It is coming. The question is, what values are going to be built into it? Will they be the traditional democratic values that we in the United States expect to have? Economic liberty, economic freedom, economic choice. Or will they be the values of our economic adversaries and economic competitors that want the advantages but don't necessarily want democratic principles and democratic choice? Instead of fighting each other over whether there will be digital currency, won't be, whether it's government operated, whether it's private sector operated, we need to turn away from that and start focusing on the bigger issue of what values are built into it. And as I said in Austin, Texas, there's nothing inherently superior about private sector operated digital currency than public sector operated. Private sector actors are just going to be as likely to surveil economic activity and in return for a government license, do what the government tells them. You can imagine in the same way government told Facebook and YouTube and Twitter what conversations were able to be held and which conversations the government didn't want held. The government could also tell a stablecoin operator, hey, if you want your license to operate that stablecoin, you better not allow people to buy ammunition, or you better not allow people to have abortions or contraception or fund right to life or give money to Donald Trump or give money to Joe Biden. You can imagine government doing the same thing and saying, hey, wait a minute, they're not subject to the First Amendment, so they're private actors, they can do what they want. Let's move beyond that kind of somewhat unsophisticated argument as to CBDC good, CBDC bad, stablecoins good, and recognize that all of them can be used to oppress us.
Yeah,
if we let it. But all of them can be used to actually enable us to get beyond our existing balkanized, expensive, monopolistic financial system to a better, more seamless, less latent, less expensive financial system. It's all about we the people. We need to come together now and have these discussions and make it known to both the stablecoin operators and the government providers of central bank digital currency that if we're engaged in lawful transactions, we will not accept being surveilled. We will not accept being censored if our activity is lawful. And that's where we need to get and move beyond this, I think, fairly passé, superficial debate about CBDCs and stablecoins. Quite frankly, the values of privacy and anti-censorship are relevant in both, and we the people need to speak up about it.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris, because folks sometimes may be using USDC or USDT or whatever else stablecoin is out there, but that information, your transactions and whatever else you're doing is being tracked, and the government can go I don't know, with a warrant or whatever it is, or say, hey, give us that data or you can't operate. Exactly like you
Tony,
said.
If I'm a stablecoin operator, which I'm not, I should want legislation that says that I cannot invade people's privacy.
Yeah.
I should want legislation that says I cannot censor lawful activity. Why? Because when U.S. law enforcement agencies or the White House knocking on my door and say, hey, we want you to stop contributions to this political candidate or to this cause, I've got now something I can point to in law and say, hey, government, you can't tell me to do that because the law says I have to exercise all lawful transactions. But without such legislation, and that's why I was so disappointed in that recent stablecoin bill, 70 pages of important requirements for stablecoins, but not one word in there that stablecoins must respect people's privacy. Not one word in there that stablecoins must allow all lawful transactions. That's a big mistake. And if we don't address that mistake, and if stablecoin legislation allows stablecoin operators to be pressured by governments, then quite frankly, all this talk about how bad CBDCs can be is irrelevant because we'll be just as oppressed by stablecoin operators.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because there is a bit of, if you want to call it, political grandstanding that's happening. Just yesterday, North Carolina, they issued a bill banning CBDC payments or digital dollar payments. Florida's Governor Ron Desantis is looking to do the same thing. But it's like, okay, but what about the stable coins like you're saying? Why do you think these states are doing this? Is it like a political thing?
Well, so when Europe adopts its digital euro and Britain adopts its digital pound, what are residents of businesses in North Carolina and Florida going to do when their European customers say we want to pay you in our digital pound and our digital euro? Are they cut off now from doing business with in that currency? I mean, again, this notion that we can locally start restricting. Look, Tony, as an American, we want choice. In our analog world, we have a choice between holding our value in paper dollars, holding it as accounts in a bank, holding our value in traveler's checks, holding our value in paintings or artwork or classic cars, holding our value in gold or silver. And now we're going to go into a digital world, and suddenly governments are going to start saying, you can't hold your value in those other instruments. You can't hold your value in central bank digital currency. You can only hold your value in what? Paper dollars? I mean, or stable coins? I mean, this is not choice. This is restricting Americans' choices in the new digital future. You know, the digital future should be one of choice, similar to the analog world, where now I can hold my value in a stable coin or multiple stable coins, or hold my value in NFTs, hold my value in Bitcoin, or hold my value in central bank digital currencies, or better yet, hold my value in a portfolio of all of the above in order to get the balance that comes with a portfolio holding. But suddenly now, because we're afraid of surveillance, governments are going to start restricting our ability to choose. You know, it reminds me a little bit of the 1970s. So, I'm not a gray hair because I don't have hair, but I once did. And when I was younger, in the 1970s, people were fearful of nuclear power.
Yeah.
So what we did in this country is basically denuclearized. We said, that's it. We're going to prevent nuclear power. We'll go all in on fossil fuels. And now we're going all in on electric power. And meanwhile, Europe, especially France, has shown that you can develop nuclear power safely and power your whole economy in a very reasonable and a very well-functioning fashion. It sounds like we're doing this again. We're afraid of the potential of a CBDC to surveil us. And so therefore we're outlawing it before we're even in the game of developing it away. You know, the biggest fear China has, the biggest fear Europe should have, is that we develop a digital dollar that's true to our values, where we build anti-censorship, anti-surveillance for lawful activity into it itself. And it's transparently unsurveillable in the same way Bitcoin is transparently unsurveillable. We build that into the architecture, and then people will flock to the digital dollar. It will be an affirmative asset to our digital dollar and would re-engage the dollar as the world's reserve currency for generations to come. Instead of looking at this so negatively, what if we actually look at it in a positive way and we design a digital dollar to be the world's the most transparent operationally, but the most private in terms of yours and my financial activity, and the most uncensorable? If we do that, we'll prop the dollar up for another 100 years, or at least 60 years of global prominence. Let's use this as an opportunity to create an attribute. Let's make privacy an attribute of a digital dollar and stablecoins. Look, by the way, we at the Digital Dollar Project believe stablecoins have shown the way forward for development. We think the government has a lot to learn from them. So we envision a world of choice, not restricting choice, is the way some of this legislation seeks to do.
For sure. To get a bit philosophical here, do you believe that some of the pushback on the central bank digital currency is a symptom of people's distrust of the government, and it has nothing to do necessarily with CBDCs, but rather
Totally.
a larger theme that since maybe 2008, the financial crisis, people are, the skepticism is there. Is like, I don't trust the government. I don't know what they're doing. And maybe in introducing the CBDC, they can help fix some of that by saying, hey, look, we're going to align this to the U.S. Constitution, your right to privacy, free speech, and so forth. Is this an avenue to help fix that distrust?
Well, it's a funny thing. We Americans have always been distrustful of government. We rebelled from a British government to create our own, and we distrusted government so much that we created this balancing of powers. So governments would always fight each other to a draw, and therefore, hopefully, people would remain free because government would be so busy fighting itself. The politicians would fight themselves rather than taking away people's freedoms. That was the central concept. And even today, that's present. We in America, we're paranoid about government surveilling us, but we're totally at ease with Facebook and Amazon and everybody else, all the private sector surveilling us. In Europe, it's the opposite. They've got their GDPR, their privacy law, that protects them from commercial surveillance, but doesn't protect them from government surveillance. And they're more comfortable with government surveillance than they are with the private sector. I'm in favor of protecting ourselves from both. I think both government and the private sector will happily surveil us if we let them. Mm-hmm. And that's why I believe we should build a digital currency, and it should be trustless. We shouldn't have to rely on politicians to say, trust us, we're not surveilling you, we're not censoring you. It should be built into the architecture, the design of the digital dollar itself. And quite frankly, it should also be there for stablecoins, because I don't trust stablecoin operators to say, we're not surveilling you and we're not doing the government's bidding in return for a license. And by the way, I don't hear any stablecoin operators right now obligating themselves to protect privacy in the way I believe they should, and I believe that a digital dollar should.
Now, the Digital Dollar Project, you and your team there have been advising the Fed. What's the latest? I don't know how much you can share. How far along are they in the process of their piloting and looking to launch something? And are they receptive to the privacy principles you guys have been suggesting?
Just as we're in a bad place right now in terms of crypto innovation, financial technology innovation in the United States, we've got this hostility toward it by our current government, which I don't think will last, by the way. I think it's a passing thing, but it's what we have right now. In the same way that the politics of central bank digital currency and stablecoins have caused the Fed and the Treasury to some degree to kind of go behind closed doors in their developmental efforts. And I don't think that's healthy. As I say in my book, Crypto Dad, I think money is as much a social construct as it is a government construct. We, the people, have as much say into what our money should look like, how it should operate, and what values it should carry, as does the government. And we ought to take a page out of the way the Brits and others are going about developing a central bank digital currency with issuing calls for comments and policy papers and actively involving the private sector. And we're seeking at the Digital Dollar Project to fill that void. That's why we exist. We're a nonprofit. We have no commercial interest in this. We've got no business to conduct. There's no financial aspect to this. We're a think tank to bring together ideas, and amongst other things, we operate roundtables around the country where we bring in scholars, we bring in advocates for the homeless and for financially underincluded, we bring in advocates for privacy, we bring in scholars, and we bring in government officials, both current ones and former ones, to talk about what value should be built in. And we published a privacy paper a year and a half ago. We're working on now about interoperability and about risk. And we'll be continuing to be publishing these papers and our findings from our roundtables in the months to come. But we're kind of playing the role that we'd like to see the government play, and that is we're taking soundings, we're talking to people, we're kicking around ideas, and we're writing papers that we then present to the government on things. We'd love to see the government more actively soliciting public opinion, but if they will not, then we're out there doing that. And we've been very involved in the debate. We do speak regularly to officials at the White House and in the Fed, and serve as that conduit, that link between we the people and the government that are at work on this. There's no question to me the United States is very, very aware. Just in the last few weeks, what they call the BRICS economies, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have announced that they're going to be working on a joint digital currency based up on the economies. Those 5 economies represent a lot more of the world's GDP than just does the United States. A digital currency based upon the economic prowess, especially the strength in commodities that those countries represent, would be quite powerful. So the evolution of this is not going to slow down. As I said at the outset of the show today, and I'll just repeat it, CBDC is coming, whether we like it or not. The real question is, what are going to be the values of it? And if there's not Americans around those conference tables in Basel, Switzerland, and Singapore, and Tokyo, and elsewhere, advocating for anti-censorship and anti-surveillance, well, we're going to have to accept the values in those digital currencies are not going to be American values. What America does well when it does it well is advocate for democratic principles. But unfortunately, America is not at the leadership table right now, and these rules are being written today. And the longer this sort of anti-CBDC thing goes on, it just means Americans are not going to be influencing the development of central bank digital currency. It's so un-American, quite frankly. It's this head in our sand, this sort of just say no, just like it was just say no to nuclear power 50 years ago. It's really it's unfortunate. It's shallow, and I think we need to get past it.
So on that note, there seems to be a tectonic shift here, and you mentioned BRICS. And as an American, I'm watching this. I'm like, is the U.S. dollar losing status, world reserve currency status? How will that affect the future of our country? And then I see they're not moving along as fast as the other countries with the digital dollar. That has me kind of concerned. Do I still want to live here? Is it economically, is it going to be the same prosperous economy and so forth that my daughter's going to live in? So is the Fed and the White House, and are these folks aware of these things? I'm sure they are, but why is there not a sense of urgency? What do you think that is?
The reason why my own feeling, the reason we're in where we are today is the people running most of our agencies and government agencies came of age in the 20th century TradFi analog economy, where the dollar was king, where there was nothing wrong with 3-day settlement of paper checks. There was nothing wrong with branch banking. There was nothing wrong with exchanges and banks closing for the weekend. And who people should be in bed at 10 o'clock at night. They shouldn't be trading things around the globe. It's a the septuagenarians are still running things, very much so. And in their mind, the world they grew up in is just fine. And I think what's happened right now where we are in 2023, is a confusion amongst American leaders between financial stability, which is their mission, and maintaining the status quo,
Mm.
which is not. I think they've coalesced the two into one concept, that the best way to maintain financial stability is to hold on tight to that 20th century world where the dollar was dominant and American banks ruled the world, and it was a non-networked world. The reason I'm optimistic is just the very nature of humanity is they will not remain there forever. The next generation will come up and take their places, and that's a generation that grew up in a networked world, that understand that they were the early ones, but they understood the power of the internet. And to think that somehow the internet won't do to banking and finance and money itself what it's already done to social networking and information and entertainment is just naive. But we're in that naive world. There's a sense of let's just hold on to that old world we knew. That won't last. It will break down. The internet of value is coming. A world of digital networks is coming, and our economic competitors and economic adversaries see that and are working on it now. And eventually we in the United States will stop resisting it and give in and go with it. Now, unfortunately, by that time, we will have lost the opportunity to be the leader in it, in the way we were the leader of the first wave of the internet of information. We're not going to be the leader of the internet of value. It's a shame because we had a head start. But this current hostility and repression that's going right now is going to cause us to lose our leadership. And quite frankly, this false debate over CBDC and stablecoins is also meaning we're going to lose the debate, because what it means is the Fed won't be sending people to these international conclaves where the values of digital money is being established. And that's a real loss. The thing we hear most often at the Digital Dollar Project is, we're doing a conference in Basel. We've got the Brits, we got the Europeans, we got the Chinese, we got the South Africans, we got the Indians. We need the Americans. Where are the Americans? The Americans aren't there because we're fighting over this, private sector, public sector, sovereign, non-sovereign digital money. The fact of the matter is the future is going to be both stable coins and CBDC, not one or the other. And Americans have a right to have choice. Anybody that wants to deny them choice is not true to ourselves. So we need to be there. We need to reassert leadership, and it will come. But the septuagenarians that are running, the octogenarians that are running things right now, need to move on, and they will. The thing about human life is they will yield to the next generation that has a different view of the importance of digital networks.
Hard question for you, Chris. On that, when do you think that change takes place? Is it within the next 5 years? Is there a major catalyst outside of a generational shift of one generation, unfortunately passing away and another coming into power? Or is there something that happens from a global macroeconomic standpoint that it's like, oh, okay, well, we need to get this going now?
Yeah. In my book, one of the observations I had after my 5 years in Washington, for your audience, I'm not a Washington insider. I spent 30 years in the private sector. I built a company on Wall Street. I took it public. I was invited to join the government by President Obama, and I made it clear right from the beginning I'd serve one term. So I served 5 years, full term, and I left Washington. But one of my observations in Washington was the problem with Washington is not that people like me leave too soon. It's people stay too long. I mean, they just stay too long. And when they stay too long, their thinking becomes ossified in the world they grew up with. Doug Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of my favorite books, he's got a quote and I'll paraphrase it. He says, anything that's invented before you turn 35 is really cool. It's the subject of a lifelong obsession, and it probably becomes the basis for a career. But anything that's invented after you turn 35 is dangerous, it's suspect, and it needs to be suppressed. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of what's going on with these septuagenarians. And I'm not, picking on one party or the other. Both parties have their, ossified elders who are calling the shots, who do, technology is changing things so fast. The internet is changing things so fast. That world of the 1960s and 70s is gone. And it's not just gone in how we interact. You and I are talking to each other through a computer screen right now. It's not just that, but it's also the way we transact. My kids who are in their late 20s now, they grew up playing video games and trading tokens and trading suits of armor and trading other things with people around the world, late into the night. And to tell them that suddenly now, that's great, you can trade all night long, but if you want to move money, you can't do it between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. the next morning. It's just an old way of thinking that unfortunately this older generation, they still like it because it's the world they know, but it's not the world that exists anymore. And so I think and I don't mean disrespect to them, many of them have served their country well. Many of them truly believe that financial stability lies in defending the status quo. But as the great author Nassim Taleb wrote in his book Anti-Fragile, the most dangerous thing you can do is harden down. Economies are organic things. You need to go with the changing times and not hold on to something of the past, for dear life, because that will only break. What we need to do is engage. And honestly, one of the things I'm most proud of in my 5 years in Washington is that when crypto came to my agency, when we were approached by two of our exchanges about greenlighting Bitcoin futures, rather than say, no way, we actually engaged with it. We spent the time, we created Lab CFTC to understand it. We dug down, we were doing Bitcoin mining in the chairman's conference room at the CFTC in the summer of 2017.
Wow.
Why? Because we wanted to learn how it worked. It was synthetic, of course. We weren't mining for the agency.
Right.
We were doing synthetic mining in order to learn what Bitcoin mining was. That was 2017. That was before most federal agencies even knew what Bitcoin was. We were doing all to prepare ourselves to engage with it. And eventually we greenlighted Bitcoin futures. 5 years later, it's still fully functioning. It's transparent. It's liquid. It's well regulated. Its data is available for others to see and use. It's a perfect demonstration that Washington regulators can engage with crypto if they have the mindset to do so, if they're willing to do so, and do so in a successful way that enhances the marketplace and protects investors in the market. That market works very well 5 years later. And it's an example of what can be done if regulators, and I believe that the next generation of regulators will return to that approach of being willing to engage with technology and not just trying to resist it at all costs.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm starting to see even members on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrats. Many are awakening to the technology and the prospects and the great innovation that can come out of it. And even just this past week, I think I saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's a 2024 presidential candidate, coming out and talking about Bitcoin and crypto, and this needs to be part of our fabric of our economy moving forward and creating jobs and so forth. So that's a great sign. But it's like we're in this period of they're fighting really hard right now. And on that note,
as Gandhi said, referring to social change, he said, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you. I was in Washington 2014 to 2017. That was during the ignore you and then the ridicule you stage. Then comes the they fight you stage. That's where we are today. But the good news is, Gandhi said, after all those three phases, then you win. So, I've never seen in history where technology can be stopped by government elites. And this group of elites won't stop this technological change. It's coming. It may have to go offshore for a while here in the United States, and others are going to innovate with it. Look at Europe has passed its MiCA legislation, which is going to, it's tough legislation. It's strong on consumer protection, investor protection, but it creates a pathway, creates a framework. The UK is similarly working on this right now. I was just in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Brazil has got a new crypto legislation, strong on investor protections. But Brazil, I was in Japan recently. I met with the JFSA, the Japanese financial securities regulator. The Brazilians, the Japanese, the Europeans, the British are all seeing what we're doing in the United States as an opportunity for them to capture the innovation initiative. And so while we're fighting it, we're in Gandhi's third phase of fighting it here in the United States. Others are getting ready to that fourth phase of how do we use this technology to empower our economies, to break down those silos that I talked about, to get to a digitally networked economy and get the advantage over the United States, which is in this, this odd phase right now, which eventually will yield.
Mm. On that note, of then they fight you phase, we've seen what some would call Operation Chokepoint 2.0, the debanking of crypto companies, or the attempt to. A lot of enforcement actions coming from multiple agencies, some from a state level like New York. And, what are you hearing about that? Are we kind of still in the midst of the storm here, or do you think we're at the tail end?
No, I think that's very much ongoing right now. Operation Chokepoint 1 was run out of the FDIC by its then current leadership, which is now in leadership there. And once again, we have what we saw with Signature Bank in New York City, with it be only about 20% of its activities were financing for crypto companies. Most of its activities was in mortgage lending for high net worth individuals, and yet that bank was shut down on a Sunday, not on a Friday, when it was still solvent. And you don't have to take that from me; take it from none other than Barney Frank, a member of its board, who said that this bank did not need to be shut down. It seems to me that a certain bloody-mindedness toward crypto has been at the heart of a lot of the actions that precipitated these bank runs. Now, there have been a number of key reports by the FDIC, by the Federal Reserve Board, and more recently by I think it was Treasury, that says crypto wasn't the heart of these issues. It was about bad assets that underperformed or were actually quite negative after we've seen a sudden change in monetary policy,
right,
in the last 12 months, 5 basis points, maybe more, and such a sudden shift. But we've also had fairly exorbitant fiscal policy with printing a lot of money in the last few years. And I think the combination of the underlying issues with these banks, and I don't know if the bank run is yet over, has been combination of profligate fiscal policy and sudden and abrupt and unanticipated monetary policy. It was only 12 months ago we were told inflation was transitory, and so it's not surprising some of these banks were not anticipating the sudden change we've had.
Yep.
So I think the government reports that said it's not crypto is absolutely correct, but I do think it was a certain heavy-handedness toward these particular banks because of hostility to their activities in crypto that caused a lot of the run on them. Bad government policy, bad government picking and choosing economic activities that are otherwise legal, but choosing to dun them or to try to diminish them is quite troubling. That's the kind of thing you expect from totalitarian governments. That's not the kind of thing you expect. If Congress wants to outlaw crypto, Congress can take a vote and outlaw crypto. And then the government agencies are duty bound to take these steps to diminish crypto activity. But if Congress is not going to pass a law, the legislative branch of our constitutional government does not outlaw these activities, then it's not appropriate, in my view, and I think most constitutional scholars would tell you, it's not appropriate then for government agencies of the executive branch to try to diminish activity in diminish lawful activities.
Yeah, it's really tough. And I know I've spoken to a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs, and folks are concerned and they're looking to move out of the United States. Some want to come in the United States, but they're hitting the brakes on that. So hopefully, man, maybe this year is the end of it, this Operation Chokepoint 2.0, and, Congress can act. A question for you that could potentially...
There too, I think I go back to, it's a generational issue.
Hmm.
I think, that this generation, strangely, I think they still think that they can just get 20 somethings into a branch bank and tell them how cool writing paper checks is, that they'll do away with all this crypto nonsense. It reminds, quite frankly, I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, and we had something called the generation gap. We fundamentally disagreed with our parents over issues like the Vietnam War and civil rights. And ultimately, time proved the younger generation to be correct. I
Hmm.
think the people in power today remind me a lot of my grandparents and parents that are saying, "Oh, you put away these childish crypto things and just trust us and the traditional banking system, and you'll be fine." I don't think it's going to work out that way. But while they're still in power, they remind me of the people that supported the Vietnam and said, we just got to fight this thing out and everything will be fine. I feel bad for them because I think we're going to look back in a few years and see that this was kind of a foolish time in American history. But they are there, and they still think they can teach young people this thing called the internet is just a passing fad.
Hmm. Now, could one of the catalysts for Congress to act to have a sense of urgency? There are some lawsuits happening now where members of the crypto industry are suing government agencies such as the SEC and so forth. And this thing is going to play out in court. If we have more companies doing this, this just looks very bad from an optics standpoint that companies born and bred in the United States, entrepreneurs, are suing a government agency for clarity and so forth. Could losses by the government agency, the SEC, then get Congress to act, light a fire under them, so to speak?
Well, so I actually think that's not a black mark. The fact that companies can sue government agencies, I think, is actually a bright spot in our economic and political and legal landscape right now. Because, in totalitarian governments, good luck with that, trying to sue a government agency, right?
Right.
But here, fortunately, if one believes that a government agency is operating outside the law, then one has the ability to go into a court and make their case. And
Mm.
I think it's a sign of the functioning of the third branch of government, the courts remaining able to be an impartial arbiter between the legislative branch that so far has been unable to pass a proper framework for crypto, and our executive branch that, in the absence of congressional legislation, has taken upon himself to be judge and jury as to what is lawful activity by Americans. And I think it's for the courts to work that out. I was very pleased to see the courts have responded positively to Coinbase's lawsuit that says, we want the SEC just to respond to our petition.
Right.
And the courts have now said they have to do so within a short period of time. I think that's a bright spot in where we are right now. It shows that part of the system is working, and thank God that we in our democracy have the right to petition our government and go to our courts and ask the courts to order our executive branch agencies. Or, the funny thing is that the CFTC and the SEC are actually not executive branch agencies,
Mm.
although they seem to be operating, by the executive branch playbook. They're actually independent agencies. I was very independent in my activities from the White House. We'd always hear what the White House had to say, but in areas of our budget and others, we told the White House, look, we're an independent agency and we need to do what we think is within our mission. And I think it's great that American citizens still have the ability, if they feel that their constitutional and their legal rights are being infringed by a government agency, that they can go and seek redress.
For sure. Final question here for you. What's your gut tell you when we may see the digital dollar? Is it like in 2025? And it's okay if you can't answer that question, given.
Yeah, it won't be that quick. First of all,
Okay.
we do not move that quick. Our government agencies do not move that quick. I think it will take national leadership. In the same way that the United States was slow on the draw when Russia decided to explore space,
Mm.
And it took the success of the Sputnik satellite orbiting the Earth and presidential leadership from President Kennedy. I'd like to see presidential leadership. And when I say to those presidential leaders, let's not look at only what could go wrong. That's legitimate. Florida Governor Ron Desantis is not wrong to be concerned about a digital dollar censoring American people and surveilling them. But he's got a blind spot because stablecoins can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But really where the blind spot is missing the opportunity. Imagine if we actually created a digital dollar, not to squeeze out alternatives, to work alongside private money, but where the digital dollar adhered to the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, Fourth Amendment, freedom of privacy. And we built that in as an operational aspect. Not only would that people would flock to the dollar around the world, it would also keep our stablecoin operators honest as well. Mm. Because if a digital dollar protected privacy, then stablecoins would have to do so as well. So let's not look upon this only as to what could go wrong. Let's look upon it as what could go right. And that's where I'd like to see American exploration and innovation right now. Let's explore a digital dollar that has it all. Why? Because then the dollar will once again have a resurgence. And this worry that we have of losing its world reserve currency status falls aside, because now people will flock to it and once again reestablish the dollar as the world's reserve currency, not straight because of what it's worth, but what its values are. Mm. Values of freedom, values of liberty, values of privacy. Let's build those in so people flock to the dollar because of its values.
Yeah. So final item, how can folks support the Digital Dollar Project or, push for those privacy principles? Is it contacting your representatives? How can they go about that?
Thank you so much. So first of all, all our information is on our website, digitaldollarproject.org, including our privacy principles, which we published a year and a half ago, which we're now in the process of revamping. We've got a program next week at Georgetown University. We were just out at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and we'll be republishing those updated with all the information gathering we're doing.
Chris, always great stuff. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you, Tony. Let's do it again soon.